You can't enter. This conference isn't for people like you. The receptionist said, her voice cutting across the quiet lobby like a warning bell, and every eye in the room turned toward Monique Bennett, a young black woman, walking alone in a sleek navy blazer and tailored pants, carrying nothing but a leather tablet case. Her calm measured steps echoing softly on the polished marble floor. She stopped briefly, letting the words sink in, observing the subtle exchange of glances among the staff, noting the thinly veiled doubt in their eyes, the whispers and cautious stares, the shift in body language as if her presence had already disturbed their sense of control. She didn't speak, didn't protest, only adjusted the strap of her case and let the atmosphere grow heavy with expectation. A junior assistant in the corner pulled out a phone, hesitant but curious, the glow of the screen reflecting the tension in the room. And Monique's gaze swept over the small audience, each person frozen between curiosity and discomfort. The head organizer stepped forward, voice firm but eyes sharp. You need to leave. You're not registered for the main sessions, he said, pointing toward the side entrance, a subtle smirk curling his lips, confident in the assumption that this woman would step aside, that the rules and the hierarchy were enough to deter her. But Monique tilted her chin slightly, a faint smile playing on her lips, not mocking, just assured, her calm unwavering, her posture straight, every motion deliberate. She pulled out her phone and tapped her earpiece, signaling the start of a silent protocol. The room seemed to pause as if sensing the shift, murmurs rising from the back as a few attendees leaned forward, whispering, eyes tracking her movements. The receptionist's voice wavered slightly as she repeated, "Ma'am, please, this area is restricted," and the words landed differently now, carrying a weight they hadn't before. Monique's inner reflection flickered, memories of past events, instances where her authority had been questioned, her value underestimated, the sting of dismissal from boardrooms and events long ago that shaped her patience and strategic thinking. She inhaled slowly, the energy in the room thickening, a ripple passing through the gathered crowd as her quiet confidence radiated outward, every witness sensing the tension and the potential of what was about to unfold. And without raising her voice, without a single confrontational gesture, she stepped closer to the stage, the polished floors reflecting the soft click of her shoes, eyes locking with the organizers, conveying a command stronger than words, a silent declaration that this space was hers to claim. The junior assistant lowered the phone, captivated, the whispers now spreading among other attendees, the uncertainty in the organizer's stance growing, the subtle hum of anticipation building like a low electric charge. And Monique glanced around, taking in the silent observers, their faces a mixture of doubt, intrigue, and rising respect, her composure unshaken, and the room collectively sensed that this moment, the delicate balance of authority and perception, was about to tip, leaving everyone in suspense, knowing that the true story, the full reveal of her power, was just moments away and ready to unfold. The organizer stepped back slightly, confusion flickering across his face as he glanced at the growing audience, the crowd shifting subtly, attendees exchanging glances and leaning forward to catch every movement. Monique Bennett remained perfectly composed, her hands resting lightly on the edges of her tablet case, eyes scanning the room with a quiet precision that seemed to measure the room and its energy in a single glance. Whispers rising as a few guests reached for their phones, recording the unexpected standoff. One woman muttered softly, "I do not understand why they are stopping her," while a young man near the back nodded, his eyes wide. Sensing that this was not an ordinary confrontation, Monique did not speak. She did not need to. Her calm aura radiated authority. The air in the hall thickened with anticipation. Every subtle movement she made commanding attention without a single raised voice. A junior assistant, hesitant yet curious, tapped her phone gently to alert the executive team. A soft chime confirming that the verification system was being engaged, and as the room felt the tension grow, the organizer attempted to regain control, raising his hand and calling out instructions to the staff, but their movements became uncertain, hesitation in their step betraying their prior confidence. Monique shifted slightly, taking a deliberate step toward the main stage, her gaze steady, unwavering. A subtle nod to her assistant, signaling the activation of the full verification protocol, and suddenly, the digital screens in the corner of the hall lit up, showing her credentials, her investments, and her authorized presence at the event. The audience collectively inhaled, realization dawning on them. The whispers now turning into murmurs of astonishment, some guests sitting straighter, others tilting their heads, trying to absorb the weight of the revelation. The organizer's smirk faltered, the color in his face changing as he processed that the woman standing in front of him was not only legitimate, but a central figure to the event. Monique's eyes held theirs, a subtle spark of authority and controlled power, and the room seemed to shift, the earlier tension giving way to a curious awe, as she allowed a small pause, letting the impact settle, a few attendees beginning to murmur supportive comments, others clearly reassessing their assumptions, and in that charged silence, Monique adjusted the strap of her case, took a final measured step, and allowed the faintest smile to touch her lips, conveying calm assurance, her presence alone rewriting the narrative of the hall, the staff now visibly reconsidering their actions. The audience leaning forward, phones poised to capture the moment. Every second stretched, anticipation building, leaving the scene suspended on the edge of revelation. The collective attention of the room entirely focused on her, and as the soft hum of the verification screens continued, Monique stood ready, poised to claim the recognition that had been withheld, her quiet confidence unmatched, her authority beginning to ripple through the space, hinting at the unfolding story that would transform the entire conference experience. Monique Bennett stood still for a moment, letting the hum of the verification system fill the hall, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the attendees, each one reflecting a mixture of shock, curiosity, and newfound respect. She took a slow step forward, the polished floor beneath her reflecting the subtle movement, and the whispers began to ripple through the crowd as one guest quietly said, "She is not who they thought she was." Another nodded, eyes wide, capturing the moment on their phone. The organizer hesitated, glancing at the screens confirming her credentials. The confidence that Monique exuded seemed to push back the previous assumptions. The staff who had earlier questioned her presence shifted uneasily, unsure how to proceed. The junior assistant gave a small signal, prompting the final verification to appear on the central display, showing her investments, her name as the primary stakeholder in the conference, and her authority clearly validated. The tension in the room began to transform into anticipation, attendees leaning slightly forward, murmuring among themselves, the subtle energy of expectation building with every second. Monique allowed her gaze to settle on the organizer, steady, calm, unyielding, without a word, her posture alone demanding acknowledgment. The crowd sensed a shift, the previous hierarchy challenged, the air charged with the collective realization that the narrative was about to change. A soft murmur grew louder, others pulling out phones to capture the unfolding moment, a few guests exchanging looks, smiles forming as the truth registered, the initial doubt and skepticism giving way to awe. Monique adjusted her stance, the leather of her tablet case catching the light as she moved slightly, her eyes scanning the room to ensure every witness felt the weight of the moment. The organizer attempted to assert authority again, voice tight, words measured but lacking the prior confidence, and the staff around him mirrored his hesitation, unsure how to respond to the unexpected turn of events. Monique took another deliberate step, closer to the main stage, her presence commanding attention without raising her voice, the subtle cadence of her movements, precise and intentional, making the room hang on every motion. The attendees now fully engaged, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, every glance, every small movement amplified by the charged energy in the hall. A gentle nod from her assistant indicated the final phase of the protocol had been activated, the verification lights on the screens flaring briefly, confirming her status as the lead investor. The room collectively inhaled, realization dawning on everyone, and Monique's calm smile, faint but deliberate, communicated authority and control, a silent statement that the moment belonged to her. The staff, the attendees, and even the organizer were caught in the shift of power, and as she paused, letting the weight of her presence settle fully across the hall, the anticipation reached a near tangible level, the crowd collectively sensing that the next movement, the first words she would speak, would complete the reversal of expectation, leaving everyone holding their breath, eager for the full revelation of the authority and influence she had carried quietly all along. Monique Bennett lifted her head, her eyes locking with the audience one by one. And in that quiet intensity, every attendee felt the weight of her presence. The staff who had previously questioned her hesitated, unsure whether to continue their objections, their gestures slowing. The murmurs rising in the hall as phones were raised to capture the moment. And yet Monique remained perfectly still, calm, exuding a silent command that made the room collectively lean forward in anticipation. She let the tension stretch, allowing the disbelief and curiosity to saturate the space, her mind briefly reflecting on the countless events where she had been underestimated, the boardrooms and meetings where her ideas were dismissed, the faces of people who had assumed she was inexperienced or unworthy, and she carried those memories as quiet fuel, letting them sharpen her focus and reinforce the poise she now displayed, a subtle adjustment of her stance, a shift in her gaze toward the main stage, signaled to her assistant, who activated the final stage of the verification system, confirming her status as a principal investor with immediate authority over the event. The digital display flashed across the hall, visible to every attendee, the images and data unmistakable, the audience collectively exhaling, some leaning back in astonishment, others whispering to neighbors, the weight of understanding dawning in their expressions, and Monique allowed herself a controlled breath, feeling the shift in energy, the room vibrating subtly with recognition and anticipation. She stepped forward, her movements measured and deliberate, the polished floor reflecting the soft click of her shoes, each step carrying the certainty and authority that had been dormant. Until now, the staff and the organizer could only watch, their previous confidence replaced by hesitation and uncertainty. A junior attendee whispered softly, "She was right all along." As others turned their attention fully, capturing every detail on cameras and phones, the atmosphere thick with the electric charge of realization, Monique's eyes scanned the room one last time before she made her way toward the center stage, the subtle smile on her lips conveying calm assurance, a quiet but unmistakable declaration that she belonged, that her authority was recognized and validated, and the hall seemed to hold its breath, suspended in that precise moment where anticipation, awe, and respect converged, and every individual in the room understood, without a word being spoken, that the narrative had shifted irrevocably, that the quiet composure and strategic patience of Monique Bennett had rewritten the assumptions of power in this space, leaving the attendees poised on the edge of revelation, eager for the next move that would fully confirm the depth of her influence and the resolution of the confrontation. The murmurs in the hall grew louder as Monique Bennett reached the center of the room, her presence commanding attention without any raised voice, the attendees leaning forward in anticipation, some capturing the moment on their phones while others simply stared, absorbing the shift in energy. The staff who had earlier tried to enforce restrictions now hesitated, their gestures faltering, the organizer's confidence visibly shaken, his eyes darting between the verification screens and Monique herself, as she allowed a subtle, deliberate pause, letting the weight of the moment fully register across the hall. She thought briefly of the countless events where her authority had been questioned, each memory sharpening her focus and reinforcing the calm strength she radiated now. A small nod to her assistant activated the final stage of the protocol, and the screens displayed her name, her position, and her investments in clear, undeniable detail, the audience collectively exhaling, realization dawning, some whispering softly, others shifting in their seats, their expressions a mixture of awe and acknowledgment, the air charged with anticipation. Monique took a slow step forward, the click of her shoes on the polished floor echoing softly, each movement intentional and measured, signaling a shift that everyone felt but could not fully articulate. She glanced across the crowd, her gaze steady and unwavering, the subtle smile on her lips conveying quiet assurance, the previous tension transforming into recognition, the room collectively sensing that the assumptions about who belonged and who did not were being rewritten in real time. She adjusted her posture, letting the calm command of her presence ripple through the hall, the junior assistant watching closely, fingers poised over a phone ready to record every second. while the attendees whispered among themselves. Questions about the unfolding situation passing from one to another, some nodding in silent agreement, others still processing the revelation. The organizer opened his mouth to speak, hesitated, and then seemed to reconsider, realizing that the narrative had shifted and that authority now rested firmly with Monique. She took another deliberate step, her eyes sweeping the room as if to ensure every witness understood the full scope of the moment. The subtle hum of the verification system confirming her legitimacy, the energy in the hall reaching a quiet peak, the anticipation and admiration palpable, and as Monique paused, the collective gaze of the room fully fixed on her. The attendees waiting for the next subtle motion, the smallest shift, or the first word that would complete the unfolding of her rightful place. Every second stretching, each breath held, the hall suspended in an almost cinematic stillness, the tension and recognition intertwining, leaving the audience poised on the edge of revelation, fully aware that Monique Bennett's quiet composure and strategic presence had already rewritten the expectations of power and influence in this space, the narrative tipping in her favor, and the entire room collectively sensing that the moment had reached the threshold of transformation, just before the full confirmation of authority and the complete acknowledgment of her role. The hall remained hushed as Monique Bennett's presence fully anchored the attention of every attendee, her posture poised, commanding yet composed, a quiet authority radiating from her that seemed to settle the previously scattered energy of the room. The staff who had initially questioned her now exchanged uncertain glances, their gestures slowing. The head organizer straightened, trying to maintain control. Yet the confidence that had propelled his earlier objections had begun to erode. The subtle hum of verification screens filled the background, confirming her credentials, her investment status, and her rightful place in the event. Whispers spread, some curious, some in awe, others whispering to their neighbors, the collective realization growing that the assumptions they had made moments ago were entirely misplaced. Monique adjusted the strap of her leather tablet case, the motion deliberate, calm, and understated, signaling to her assistant who quietly ensured that all systems were tracking and broadcasting her legitimacy in real time. The audience absorbed each motion, the weight of recognition building. A few attendees leaned in, subtle nods shared, and quiet expressions of acknowledgment rippled through the room, the previous tension and disbelief replaced by a cautious respect. Monique's eyes moved across the faces of those gathered, taking in the subtle shift in energy. The half-smiles of attendees who had doubted her initially, the silence of those staff members who had hoped to assert authority over her. The collective attention hung on the edge of each breath, each slight movement, as if the hall itself understood that a narrative was being rewritten before them. She stepped lightly, yet decisively closer to the main stage, each step precise, each motion carrying the weight of strategic patience, the polished floor reflecting the soft click of her shoes, signaling a rhythm that drew the room further into her orbit. Murmurs of surprise and admiration exchanged, phones raised and cameras aimed to capture the moment. The realization settling fully that the authority she held was undeniable and unchallenged. Monique allowed a subtle nod and a slow inhalation, signaling the quiet command she wielded without a single raised voice. And as the audience continued to absorb the weight of her presence, the hall itself seemed to acknowledge the shift. Every whispered conversation, every glance, every pause and movement reflecting the dawning awareness that Monique Bennett's calm, deliberate, and unwavering poise had transformed the atmosphere entirely. The prior assumptions of control and hierarchy dissolved, replaced by a collective recognition that she had quietly claimed the space, her authority established, and the room poised in anticipation of the next subtle action that would complete the full acknowledgment of her rightful position within the event. The audience hanging on each measured motion, every breath, every small gesture, fully immersed in the unfolding moment of revelation. The organizer finally cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure, but the confidence in his voice faltered as the audience subtly shifted toward Monique Bennett, their curiosity and recognition growing with every second. She stood with a quiet strength that filled the room, the subtle glow of the verification screens highlighting her name and credentials, a visual reminder to everyone present that her presence was fully authorized, and her influence undeniable. The staff who had been enforcing restrictions earlier now moved cautiously, their gestures hesitant. The murmurs among attendees increased as they shared whispered confirmations with neighbors, phones raised in silent witness. Capturing the moment as it unfolded, a few attendees tilted their heads, trying to process the swift transformation of authority and the realization that Monique's calm and deliberate demeanor had already altered the perception of power in the hall. She allowed a small pause, letting the collective realization settle, the polished floor beneath her reflecting the soft rhythm of her measured steps as she adjusted slightly, each motion deliberate, signaling both patience and control. Her eyes swept across the room, noting the subtle change in expressions, the softened stances of the staff, the alert attention of the audience, and the hesitation in the organizer. Every witness aware that the assumptions they had made moments before were being quietly undone. Monique shifted her weight, leaning slightly toward the stage, a faint smile playing across her lips, conveying quiet assurance. The audience now fully attentive, every whisper and subtle movement carrying the weight of understanding. The verification system humming softly in the background, the display confirming her role and authority with precision, reinforcing her legitimacy to all. She lifted her chin slightly, exuding controlled confidence that seemed to ripple through the crowd, drawing their attention and guiding their perception. The murmurs grew into soft acknowledgments, a nod here, a quiet smile there. The energy in the hall subtly transforming as the truth of her authority settled into every corner of the room. Monique's deliberate pace and unshakable presence created a tension that was both compelling and instructive, teaching the audience, in real time, the value of measured confidence, the power of calm assertion, and the undeniable impact of rightful authority. And as she stood poised, letting the weight of the moment resonate fully, the organizer's attempt to regain control diminished, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement that Monique Bennett was in command of the situation. The hall collectively attuned to her every motion, every breath, fully immersed in the unfolding affirmation of her status and influence. Anticipation building for the next deliberate step, the next controlled motion that would further solidify the shift in perception and prepare the hall for the inevitable acknowledgement of her complete authority over the proceedings. Monique Bennett allowed a slow, deliberate pause as the room seemed to hang on her every breath, the polished floor reflecting the soft light and every subtle movement she made, her gaze sweeping across the audience, noting the shifting expressions of astonishment, curiosity, and a dawning respect. The staff who had previously tried to enforce restrictions now moved with caution, their gestures tentative. The head organizer glancing repeatedly at the verification screens, realizing that the narrative had shifted and that the authority they assumed was no longer theirs to wield. Murmurs flowed through the crowd, soft at first, and then building as attendees exchanged quiet confirmations with one another. Phones lifted to record the moment, capturing the subtle transformation of energy in the hall. Monique's stance remained composed and steady, a calm assurance emanating from her presence. Each step forward measured and intentional, signaling both patience and control. The junior assistant subtly gestured toward the central display, activating the final segment of the verification protocol, the screens glowing with undeniable evidence of her position, investments, and legitimacy. The audience collectively leaning in, absorbing the full scope of the revelation, the subtle acknowledgement of her rightful authority rippling through the hall. Monique adjusted her posture, the faintest nod to her assistant conveying that the next step was imminent. The atmosphere charged yet measured, the energy in the room balanced between awe and anticipation. The murmurs now punctuated by soft exclamations of recognition. The staff, caught in the transition of power, unsure how to proceed but increasingly aware that the hierarchy they had assumed was dissolving. Attendees glanced at one another, sharing looks of realization, the subtle click of Monique's shoes on the polished floor echoing in the stillness as she approached the center of the stage. The audience fully engaged, phones poised to capture every second. The quiet hum of the verification system reinforcing her presence and authority. Monique's eyes scanned the room with precision, each person present feeling the weight of her calm command, her deliberate movements drawing attention without raising her voice. the tension of the previous moments now transforming into collective acknowledgment, a few guests murmuring softly to each other, nods and subtle smiles forming as they processed the full extent of her influence. The organizer attempting a last adjustment to regain control, his voice steady but lacking conviction, the staff mirroring his uncertainty, the room collectively sensing the shift, Monique standing poised and unyielding, the hall now fully attuned to her presence, the anticipation building, the subtle power in her controlled composure creating a gravitational pull, drawing the focus of every attendee toward her. The murmurs and whispered confirmations interweaving with the quiet hum of the verification displays. And as Monique paused once more, letting the weight of the moment fully settle, the audience collectively, realizing that she had not only claimed her space but had irrevocably shifted the perception of authority in the room, leaving every individual poised on the edge of what was to come, fully aware that her next action would complete the transformation of the hall's energy and affirm her place as the central figure of influence and recognition. Monique Bennett finally spoke, her voice calm yet resonant, cutting through the soft murmurs of the hall like a blade. I am the main investor of this conference, and my presence here is fully authorized. And the words landed with immediate clarity, the room collectively shifting as attendees leaned in, phones raised, capturing the declaration. The staff who had earlier questioned her hesitated, their gestures uncertain. The head organizer's face revealed a flicker of disbelief, his earlier confidence now giving way to the undeniable truth displayed on the verification screens, the subtle hum of the system confirming every detail, investments, credentials, and authority. The audience absorbed each second, processing the swift transformation from doubt to recognition, murmurs of acknowledgment growing, heads nodding, eyes widening, and a few exclamations rising in quiet surprise. Monique allowed the pause to stretch, letting the weight of her declaration settle fully across the hall, her posture unwavering, each movement deliberate, her gaze scanning the room to ensure that every attendee felt the impact of her presence. The polished floor reflecting the faint click of her shoes as she took a slow, measured step toward the stage, the subtle rhythm signaling authority without the need for raised voice or overt gesture. The audience caught in the stillness, every breath and small motion amplified, the collective attention held firmly by her calm command, the staff visibly recalibrating, hesitant to interrupt or assert control, the verification system humming softly in the background, reinforcing her legitimacy and establishing a new hierarchy in the hall. A quiet nod to her assistant triggered the final confirmation of access, the screens glowing with her full credentials, the energy in the room transforming from tension to admiration, the whispers among attendees now carrying respect and recognition, the subtle smiles, nods, and glances exchanged reflecting the shift in perception. Monique's eyes swept across the hall, noting the change, the acknowledgement of authority settling across every corner of the room. The previous assumptions of who belonged and who did not now entirely overturned. She allowed a faint, deliberate smile, the minimal motion communicating a profound confidence and controlled power. The audience captivated, every individual sensing the silent assertion of rightful authority, the staff still uncertain yet aware that any further resistance would be misplaced, the organizer adjusting his posture, the lines of control subtly shifting, the murmurs and whispered exclamations continuing to spread, phones documenting the moment as the story unfolded, attendees leaning in, absorbing the demonstration of calm, strategic power, Monique's presence alone commanding recognition, the hall hanging on every motion, every subtle gesture, the weight of her authority fully settling, anticipation building as the audience collectively waited for the next deliberate action, understanding that the full acknowledgement of her status was imminent, the room now poised on the cusp of transformation, every witness present sensing that the narrative of power, patience, and rightful recognition had been irrevocably rewritten by the quiet, measured, and commanding presence of Monique Bennett. Monique Bennett stepped closer to the center of the stage, the soft click of her shoes echoing in the hushed hall, the audience fully attentive, every eye fixed on her with a mix of curiosity, astonishment, and admiration. The staff who had tried to restrict her now stood frozen, uncertain, their gestures cautious as they realized the shift in authority. The verification screens continued to glow softly, displaying her credentials, investments, and position as the main investor, confirming in undeniable detail her rightful presence. The murmurs in the hall grew steadily, low voices exchanging astonished acknowledgments, subtle nods and glances passing between attendees. As the realization spread, Monique allowed a slight pause, letting the weight of her presence and the confirmation of her authority fully register across the room, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, each individual sensing the quiet power and measured confidence emanating from her. The energy in the hall thickened with anticipation, the collective focus now entirely on her. A few guests capturing the moment on their phones while others simply watched, absorbing the transformation of perception. The head organizer shifted in place, clearly recalibrating his stance. The certainty he had assumed moments before replaced by the undeniable fact that the authority and command now rested with Monique. She took another deliberate step forward, each movement precise, measured, and purposeful, the polished floor reflecting the rhythm of her steps, every motion communicating controlled power without a single word. The junior assistant subtly gestured, ensuring that the final verification process was active and that every display reflected the true authority she held. The audience collectively responding, leaning in, whispering softly to each other as the depth of her influence and legitimacy became clear. The murmurs now interwoven with expressions of recognition and quiet respect. Monique adjusted the strap of her leather tablet case. A minimal movement, yet full of intention, signaling the completion of the verification sequence. The hall acknowledging silently that she had reclaimed the narrative, her calm composure guiding the shift in energy, the staff no longer questioning, the organizer holding his words, and the audience fully engaged, every individual processing the quiet yet undeniable command she wielded, the anticipation reaching a peak, the room poised for the next subtle gesture that would solidify her full recognition and influence. Every eye, every breath, every small movement collectively heightening the sense of expectancy. And as Monique paused, standing tall, her presence alone shaping the room, it became clear to all that the narrative had irrevocably changed, that the assumptions of authority and control had been quietly yet completely rewritten, and that the next step she took would transform the hall entirely, leaving the attendees on the edge of revelation, fully attuned to her poised, unwavering, and strategic command. Monique Bennett finally lifted her gaze to meet the full audience, her eyes steady and unwavering, a calm authority emanating from her that seemed to ripple through the room. The hall silent except for the soft hum of the verification screens confirming her credentials, each display highlighting her investments and her position as the main investor. The staff who had previously challenged her now stood quietly, hesitant and uncertain, their gestures minimal as they absorbed the transformation of power in the space. The organizer attempted to speak, his voice measured but lacking conviction, glancing repeatedly at the screens and the audience who were fully engaged, murmurs rippling through the crowd as whispers of recognition and acknowledgment spread from person to person, phones capturing the moment in every corner, the audience leaning forward with anticipation and subtle nods of understanding. Monique allowed a slow, deliberate pause, letting the weight of the moment settle fully across the hall, her presence commanding attention without a single raised voice, the polished floor reflecting each deliberate step as she shifted slightly, her movements precise and intentional, signaling control and patience. The junior assistant subtly nodded, activating the final confirmation protocols that displayed her legitimacy to the entire room, the attendees collectively absorbing the full scope of her authority, the murmurs now carrying soft exclamations of awe, expressions of understanding, and gestures of acknowledgment. Monique's eyes swept across the faces of every witness, noting the subtle change in posture, the quiet respect, and the growing recognition that the hierarchy in the hall had irrevocably shifted, the subtle click of her shoes echoing softly as she approached the stage center, the audience holding their breath, every small motion amplified, the air charged with anticipation, the previous tension and doubt replaced by a recognition of rightful authority. Monique adjusted her stance, a faint, confident smile playing on her lips as she scanned the crowd. Each attendee aware that the narrative had transformed completely, her calm composure and measured presence creating an undeniable gravity that drew focus and attention. The staff, the organizer, and the audience collectively sensing the shift. The verification system humming quietly in the background, the glow of the displays reinforcing her legitimacy. The murmurs continuing to build, conversations of quiet admiration spreading through clusters of attendees, subtle nods, and exclamations punctuating the air as everyone absorbed the moment. Monique paused once more, her posture unwavering, the energy in the room fully attuned to her presence. Every breath, every small motion captured in the collective consciousness. The anticipation reaching its peak as the audience collectively sensed that her next deliberate action would complete the full acknowledgment of her influence and authority. The room poised on the edge of realization, fully immersed in the unfolding affirmation of her rightful role and strategic command. Every eye fixed, every whisper attentive, and the hall now suspended in a cinematic stillness as Monique Bennett quietly held the center of power, her presence alone reshaping perception, commanding respect, and leaving the attendees fully aware of the quiet, controlled, and undeniable authority she carried. Monique Bennett took a slow, deliberate step onto the main stage, the soft click of her shoes on the polished floor echoing through the hushed hall. Every attendee's gaze fixed on her, the air thick with anticipation. The staff who had previously attempted to restrict her now standing quietly, uncertainty evident in their posture. The head organizer glancing repeatedly at the glowing verification screens, each display confirming her credentials, investments, and position as the primary investor. The audience murmuring softly among themselves, some exchanging glances, others capturing the moment on their phones. The subtle shift in energy palpable as recognition and respect began to ripple through the crowd. Monique allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of the realization settle, her presence alone commanding the space without a single word, the polished floor reflecting her measured movements as she adjusted her stance. A faint smile conveying quiet assurance and controlled authority, the murmurs of acknowledgment growing, the audience leaning in, nodding subtly, each individual absorbing the transformation of the room's energy. Monique's gaze swept across the hall, noting the hesitant staff, the intrigued attendees, the organizer now visibly recalibrating his posture, the subtle hum of the verification system reinforcing the undeniable fact of her authority, the collective anticipation building as she took another deliberate step, her body language communicating patience, confidence, and control, the energy in the hall now fully centered on her. Murmurs now punctuated by soft expressions of recognition and admiration, the staff no longer questioning the organizer's attempt at regaining authority fading, the attendees fully engaged, each subtle motion of Monique amplified by the charged atmosphere, the audience collectively sensing the shift in power, the quiet gravity of her presence creating a sense of inevitability, the verification screens confirming her legitimacy, reinforcing the narrative she had silently claimed. Whispers of acknowledgment and subtle nods spreading throughout the crowd, Monique's deliberate, unhurried movements, signaling that she was in command, the hall hanging on every breath, every gesture, every small motion, the energy now balanced between awe, curiosity, and understanding, and as she paused once more, the room collectively exhaled, absorbing the transformation, the previous assumptions of hierarchy and control dissolved, replaced by a recognition of her rightful authority, the attendees poised on the edge of the next moment, fully aware that her calm, measured, and strategic composure had irrevocably shifted the dynamics of the event, and that the subsequent moments would solidify her influence and leave no doubt as to the command she held over the space, the atmosphere vibrating subtly with the acknowledgement of her presence, every whisper, glance, and breath harmonizing to create a collective understanding that Monique Bennett had quietly yet completely claimed her place at the center of power, ready to guide the unfolding of the event with calm assurance and unshakable authority. The hall was now fully attentive, every attendee fixed on Monique Bennett as she stood tall at the center of the stage, the glow from the verification screens illuminating her calm, confident presence, The staff who had previously questioned her authority now silent, their earlier gestures of restriction replaced with subtle movements of acknowledgment, the head organizer shifting in place, clearly reassessing his position. The murmurs of the audience rising softly as whispers of recognition. And astonishment spread, phones lifted to capture the moment, the soft hum of the system reinforcing her legitimacy, each display confirming her investments, credentials, and rightful position, the energy in the hall. Charged yet steady, anticipation coiling like a spring, Monique allowed herself a brief pause, letting the collective realization settle, the subtle adjustment of her posture signaling complete control and measured authority, her gaze sweeping across the room, noting the small nods, widened eyes, and quiet expressions of understanding, the polished floor reflecting her deliberate, confident steps as she moved slightly forward, the rhythm of her movements commanding attention without a word, the audience hanging on each subtle motion, the hall now alive with the sense of recognition and respect, the verification system humming softly in the background, confirming every detail of her status, the murmurs of acknowledgment growing steadily, a few attendees exchanging quiet comments in surprise, some leaning in closer to fully take in the transformation unfolding. Monique's calm composure radiated outward, her presence alone shaping the energy of the space, the staff now fully aware of the shift, the organizer pausing, his previous certainty dissolved, replaced with acknowledgment of the undeniable truth of her authority, the crowd fully engaged, each individual absorbing the magnitude of the moment, the anticipation thickening as everyone sensed the next subtle action she would take to solidify her position. Monique allowed a slow, controlled breath, the pause intensifying the weight of her presence, the audience leaning forward, phones recording, murmurs of recognition, punctuating the charged air, her gaze sweeping once more across every face, noting the expressions of realization and admiration, her small smile a quiet confirmation of her calm triumph, the polished stage beneath her reflecting the soft click of her measured steps, every motion deliberate and intentional, communicating authority without the need for raised voices, the hall collectively sensing the completion of the narrative shift, the quiet gravity of her presence establishing a new equilibrium, the previous hierarchy rewritten, the attendees fully aligned in acknowledgement of her position, the subtle hum of the verification displays reinforcing the reality of her influence. And as Monique paused to center herself, the room holding its collective breath, every whisper, glance, and gesture harmonizing into a single moment of realization, it became undeniable that she had quietly, decisively, and completely claimed her rightful place at the heart of the event, her calm assurance and strategic presence leaving no doubt in the minds of anyone present that Monique Bennett's authority and influence were fully established, the audience collectively immersed in the quiet power and composed dominance she exuded, ready to witness the final unfolding of her control and the complete acknowledgement of her role in the event.